You feel the first contraction, and you are alone. No hospital, no doctor, no epidural. Just you, your body, and a process that has played out the exact same way for hundreds of thousands of years. For 99% of human history, this wasn't a hypothetical, this was childbirth. No machines beeping, no bright lights, no one telling you it's almost over. Just your own breathing, the people around your fire, and a baby trying to make its way into the world. So, how did anyone survive this? How did your ancestors do it without modern medicine, without antibiotics, without a single ultrasound? The answer is more complicated, more brutal, and more communal than you might expect. Let's start with the basic problem. Human birth is harder than almost any other animal's. Anthropologists call this the obstetrical dilemma. It means human babies have unusually large heads compared to the size of the mother's pelvis. This is the trade-off for having big brains. A bigger brain needs a bigger skull. But a bigger skull has to somehow fit through a pelvis that also needs to be narrow enough for walking upright on two legs. Wenda Trevathan, a biological anthropologist who has spent decades studying the evolution of childbirth, argues that this tight fit is exactly why human birth became a social event instead of a solitary one. Most mammals give birth alone. Most primates give birth alone. Humans, for almost all of their history, did not. Trevathan's research points to something called the birth attendant hypothesis. Because the baby's head rotates as it moves through the birth canal, it usually emerges facing backward, away from the mother. A mother giving birth completely alone would have to reach down and guide her own baby out at an awkward angle, often without being able to see what she was doing. Across cultures, anthropologists have documented that women in labor are almost never left by themselves. Someone is always there: a mother, a sister, an aunt, an experienced older woman from the group. This is the first thing to understand about ancient childbirth. It was never a private event, it was a group project. Picture the scene. A woman feels her labor begin near dusk. The light is fading. Someone builds up the fire. The other women in the group gather close, not in panic, but with practiced calm, because most of them have done this before, more than once. There is no separate room to retreat to. There is just the same shelter everyone sleeps in, the same patch of ground everyone eats on. Birth happens in the middle of daily life, not apart from it. One woman holds her from behind, supporting her weight. Another crouches in front, ready to catch the baby and clear its airway. An older woman, someone who has seen many births and many deaths, talks her through each contraction, telling her when to push and when to rest. This division of labor wasn't random. It mirrored exactly what modern doulas and midwives do today, except it had been refined over thousands of generations of trial and error, passed down as oral knowledge from mother to daughter. But here is the part that's hard to sit with. This system, as sophisticated as it was, still failed often, brutally often. Skeletal evidence backs this up. Bioarchaeologists studying remains from sites across Europe and the Near East have found that a significant percentage of adult female skeletons show signs consistent with complications during their reproductive years, and that infant mortality in pre-industrial populations regularly exceeded 1 in 3 children dying before age 5. Researchers studying historical and hunter-gatherer demographic data, including work compiled by anthropologist Hillard Kaplan on hunter-gatherer life history, estimate that maternal mortality in populations without modern medical intervention could run dramatically higher than today's global average. Childbirth wasn't just painful. For a meaningful portion of women, it was the single most dangerous event of their lives. So what did they actually do when something went wrong? This is where the evidence gets more remarkable. Ethnographic studies of hunter-gatherer groups, like the work anthropologist Richard Lee conducted with the Jew, Hoansi people of the Kalahari, recorded detailed birth practices passed down through generations. Birth attendants knew how to try to turn a breech baby, knew which plants might ease pain or slow bleeding, knew how to cut and tie the umbilical cord with whatever sharp tool was on hand, often a stone flake or a sharpened reed. None of this was guesswork improvised in the moment. It was inherited technical knowledge, as real and as practiced as flint knapping or tracking an animal. Archaeological sites add another layer to the picture. At locations like Abrigo de Peña Capon in Spain, researchers have found burials of young women alongside newborns, frozen evidence of birth complications stretching back thousands of years. These aren't just sad footnotes, they are data. They tell us this risk was constant, recognized, and built into how ancient societies organized themselves around women in late pregnancy. Now, let's reconstruct what the days right after birth actually looked like, because survival didn't end once the baby arrived. The newborn would be immediately placed skin to skin against the mother, partly for warmth, partly because there was no incubator, no blanket warmer, nothing but body heat standing between a fragile newborn and the cold. Breastfeeding usually began within the first hour, not as a parenting choice, but as the only available form of nutrition, immunity, and survival. There was no formula, no bottles, no alternative. For the next several weeks, the new mother would not be doing this alone either. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy, who has written extensively on the evolution of human cooperative parenting, describes humans as a uniquely cooperative breeding species. Unlike most primates, where the mother does nearly all the infant care herself, human mothers throughout most of history relied heavily on what researchers call allomothers, meaning other caregivers, grandmothers, sisters, sometimes the whole group. This wasn't a luxury, it was structural. A mother recovering from birth while exclusively breastfeeding simply could not also gather enough food, carry water, and protect a newborn entirely by herself, especially while caring for older children at the same time. This is one of the more counterintuitive twists in the whole story. We tend to imagine the nuclear family, one mother, one father, one baby, as the natural default for human life. But for most of human history, it wasn't. Raising a child to adulthood took an entire support network. Grandmothers, in particular, played an outsized role. Some researchers refer to this as the grandmother hypothesis, the idea that human females evolved to live decades past menopause, specifically because older women who could no longer have their own children were so valuable at helping raise their grandchildren that their presence increased the whole group's chances of survival. So, a baby being born wasn't really one event. It was the activation of an entire web of relationships, all oriented around keeping that one small, helpless, big-headed creature alive long enough to grow up. Now, think about what this means for you today. You were born into a hospital, or a birthing center, or a clean room with trained professionals and equipment that monitors your mother's heart rate and yours in real time. You probably take that for granted, the same way you take clean water and antibiotics for granted. But scale that back to the deep past, and birth becomes one of the clearest windows into how dependent humans have always been on each other, not as a sentimental nicety, as a hard biological requirement. The obstetrical dilemma that made your skull just barely fit through your mother's pelvis didn't go away. It's still true for every single human birth on Earth today. What changed is the safety net underneath it. Hospitals replaced huddled fires, surgeons replaced the experienced older woman crouched and waiting. But the underlying vulnerability is the same vulnerability your ancestors faced for hundreds of thousands of years. You feel the first contraction, and you are alone. Except, if you trace the story back far enough, you realize that for almost the entirety of human history, this is the one moment no one was ever willing to let a person face by themselves.